Welcome to what would have been our South by Southwest 2020 session called How to Launch and Grow Next-Gen Blockchain Networks. I'm Karen Kilroy from Kilroy Blockchain, and I'll be hosting this session, along with my panelists, Paige Krieger from IBM Blockchain, Todd Little from Oracle, and I'd like to go around and let each of my participants introduce themselves quickly. Paige, can we start with you?
Yeah, of course. First of all, just wanted to thank you, Karen, for putting this together. My name is Paige Krieger, and I am a digital engagement program manager on the IBM Blockchain team, focusing on the digital experience with everything to do with IBM Blockchain Platform.
Todd?
Hi, yes, this is Todd Little. I'm the Chief Architect for the Oracle Blockchain Platform, and happy to be on another panel with you, Karen.
And I've had the pleasure of working with Paige and Todd quite a bit, and they've been wonderful resources for me, and I'm happy to introduce them to everybody who's listening. Now, we're going to jump right into questions. This is pretty amazing that we have pulled the same panel together, and we are actually 2 hours earlier than what we were scheduled for at South by Southwest. So the show is going on here, and because we think we have some information that can really help people in deciding where they're heading from here. My first question is specifically regarding the use of blockchain and in battling the coronavirus epidemic. Now, I know, Paige, you had some things to add to that as well.
I think the main areas are around managing patient records and the medical supply chains, as well as streamlining those clinical trials and the data associated. So there's various startups that are building solutions that would track the supply chains of medical supplies and essentials like masks, gloves, protective gear, just bringing visibility to those supply chains, as well as connecting them with the areas that have the most demand. And then IBM is actually working with the CDC, and this was prior to the outbreak, but using blockchain to monitor the different diseases and report outbreaks in real time. So just having quicker access to accurate information, and that way public health agencies can effectively gather the data about patients and prescriptions and potential treatments that become available. And then I also learned about an application called HashLog, that's not related to IBM, but it allows researchers and scientists to track the spread of the virus, understand its trends, and use the data to then ensure that the information being shared can't be manipulated or changed. And last but not least, expediting the clinical trials and sharing the findings across the medical community to enable faster vaccine development and just greater patient control of their own data, but also permissioning that data to be used for the common good.
Wow. Okay, that is really a lot of different applications. It sounds like, you know, blockchain is really going to be a cornerstone in the way everything's being done, because now we can't take chances like we used to on whether something is true or not. It's definitely a technology that has a good use at this point. Now, I would like to dig in a little further, you know, all the way back down to the roots of blockchain. And, you know, we've got a lot of different IoT devices and machines that are participating in creating audit trails. And then there's also AI programs that are going to be jumping into the mix and doing things like analyzing whether a potential cure could happen, or analyzing trends, or, you know, putting out warnings for people. Now, you know, these things are going to be tied back to traceability and identification, right? So in order for a machine to be able to produce something that could be validated later, you have to know that that machine itself was valid, or that the users were valid. Todd, could you speak to that point?
Sure. Anything that participates in a blockchain is going to need some kind of identity. We need to be able to trace back, where that information came from. And so things like IoT devices in particular generally have some mechanism to identify themselves already. That may be a secret, a password. More commonly, I think we're seeing the use of public key cryptography, PKI. And I expect that a lot of these devices are going to end up with their own private public key pairs that are used to make sure that the information they send is transported correctly, that the authenticity of the device can be verified. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. And that's just a critical aspect of being able to make sure that the information that you're recording in this indelible ledger is actually accurate and authentic.
Okay. And as things move forward, like for instance with AI, I'll tell you just a little bitty story and you can let me know your thoughts on it, Todd. One time when I first started scratching my head about this, we were working on Riley, which is a product that helps people who are blind and visually impaired to get a description of what's around them. And so we really started digging into AI, and we're like, well, how do we know that the data can't be tampered with? And then the other question was, how do we know? I asked the question when I was at CES a couple of years ago. I asked the question to a group. It was a panel in a great big room with hundreds of people. I said, well, how do you make sure that the data doesn't get tampered with? And I thought they would just say, well, we use this. And they didn't. They kind of said, yeah, that's a huge problem. But what's even worse is we don't know if the algorithms have been tampered with. So I wondered, can you speak to that point at all, Todd? How could blockchain help with that?
Yeah, I think, the key thing about training AI models, right, or machine learning models is you have to make sure that the data is accurate and authentic, right? The old expression, garbage in, garbage out. And so what we're going to see, I think, is that the models themselves will get recorded on the blockchain, which then makes, or at least, some information about them, maybe a hash of the model, something like that. So you can verify that the model still has been running and has not been changed. But also sort of the decisions that have been made by the model and the information being fed into the model should also all probably come from blockchain. That way you can be assured that the information that's feeding your model is accurate and authentic. And you have the conclusions being recorded as well, so they can't be tampered with. And part of this is to ensure, if you look at things like loans or whatever, you have to be able to show that your loan process isn't biased in some form, right? So it's not discriminating against certain parties. Well, if you can show that your model's been trained with accurate information and how that model came up with its conclusion, then you can hopefully then prove that the loan decision was made without bias. So I see that we're going to do a lot of recording of this kind of information. Like you say, even the models themselves, or at least a hash of them, will be used to make sure that the models have not been tampered with, the data's not been tampered with, and the authenticity of all the pieces.
That is really fascinating, and it sounds like it's critical. I know, Paige, your company IBM has been talking about code that writes code. AI that writes code, and at what point can you trust it? At what point do you not know if it's real or from a bad actor? So it's really neat that all this stuff is coming into play at the same time. We're getting those advances. Now, I have a question for Paige. When blockchain is implemented in a business, what efficiencies are being gained and what business metrics are impacted?
Yeah, so this is a really common question that we get in our space, and rightly so, just with more projects transitioning from proof of concept into pilot and production. We're starting to see a wider range of efficiencies being gained. The first and most common one being a reduction in resources that are dedicated to dispute management and reconciliation, because it's no longer a comparison of records and there's one shared single source of truth. It's eliminating the need for as many people to be fact-checking and cross-checking the information, and followed by the increased transparency in supply chain and the improved legal processes. So there's, I guess, more automation when it comes to the audit process, or there's just more availability of information. So quicker time to value, increased visibility, and ultimately more cash flow because there's less cash tied up in the disputes. Around operational efficiencies, there's just reduced transaction costs and overall blockchain going beyond that and re-engineering business relationships, monetization of illiquid assets, and just redistributing data and value flows altogether. So those are just some of the most common, but I think that those are the business metrics that we're seeing positively impacted the most.
Karen, one thing I found as a possible interesting use case, by the way, for the combination of private and public blockchains is one that where private blockchains hashes are periodically published to the public networks. And this then would allow any of the participants in a private network to be able to verify that their information is accurate and up to date, or at least their copy of the ledger, which I thought was a rather interesting way to be able to use a public blockchain, just simply as a recording of the state of other blockchains or the hash of the latest block. So.
That's interesting. Now, you say that's being done, Todd, or
I don't know anyone that's doing that. I know it's been proposed by several people, John Wolpert in particular. So I think that's, something that has some validity because, you have a consortium blockchain, which is typically what we've been focusing on at Oracle. You've got a number of participants that don't necessarily trust each other. So how can they or others be able to make sure that they've got the most recent copy of the ledger and that it's not been tampered with? So by recording periodically a hash of the latest block, then they're able to then be able to verify that the copy they have isn't in fact valid without trusting anybody else.
Wow. That's really amazing. It sounds like something that could really come into play. Okay, so let's see here. What is the biggest challenge that you've seen, Todd, in implementing enterprise blockchain, and how was it addressed?
Yeah, I see two. I see the issues on the development side. So developing applications for a blockchain, is particularly developing smart contracts or chain code, is different than developing software for other things. It's got to be deterministic. There's a whole bunch of stuff, properties and stuff like that about that change sort of the model for development. And I think that's a big issue. And so I think things around like development tooling, easier means for developers to be able to iterate over their code, to be able to share that with others and validate that the chain code or the smart contract that they've written is correct. So I think helping developers is going to be a big area of new development for blockchain. I think the other areas around for the enterprise is in the area of deploying, managing, monitoring, and operating their blockchain networks. A lot of the tooling that's out there is relatively primitive. Much of it is command line based. And so trying to deploy a network across a group of organizations is a challenge. And so more tooling that can affect that, things like governance. So, who's the decision about who's going to participate in this particular blockchain when you're talking about enterprise blockchains? That's the kind of stuff that should be done on the blockchain itself. And I think we'll see developments in that area. So I think those are some of the areas that are going to be a challenge, or are a challenge for customers trying to deploy large-scale blockchain networks.
Wow, okay. Those sound like some interesting solutions as well. And Paige, would you like to add to what Todd said there?
Yeah, I agree on the governance and standardization piece. I think that having that as a key foundation for a blockchain network is important to establish that from the get-go. And I think by different organizations forming these industry consortia, I think that's a good first step, whether it's Blockchain and Transport Alliance or the Oil and Gas Consortium. I think that they're enabling a community approach to establishing the standardization. And there's also groups like the Token Taxonomy Initiative or the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance that are doing good work in this space. And I also think it's important to take into consideration the existing standards. So for example, in food safety, there's already the GS1 standards. And I know that IBM Food Trust was initially based on those standards with additional ones built on top. So it's a matter of having those rules, or I guess standards to follow, approved and created by the group, and then also adopted by the industry, so that once these networks are up and running, the network effect can be achieved, and as many corporations that want to participate can, and they have rules to follow.
Fascinating. And while I've got you, Paige, what's the most advanced blockchain use case that you know of now, and what makes it advanced?
So I think that question is one that multiple different solutions pop into my head, but one that would probably resonate best and that I think is advanced, defining advanced as reaching the broadest amount of people and realizing the full value of blockchain, would be a solution that we worked on in Europe with a company called Sucafina, and the solution is called Farmer Connect. And essentially, it's built on top of IBM Food Trust, which is already an advanced solution in itself because it tracks the supply chain, has a traceability and certification module, has a freshness module, provides data like that to the end consumer. But with Farmer Connect, it's also building in a financial aspect and connecting the coffee growers with the consumers. So essentially with the application, coffee drinkers can reward the farmers themselves or their communities basically by tipping them. And the data is taken from the blockchain and shows the consumer the journey that their coffee took to get to them, but also it reassures them of the ethical sourcing and labor practices associated. And it's industry driven, it leverages digital identity, and it really just pulls together a complex ecosystem. So I think that tying that together and also providing that financial aspect is what makes it advanced. There's also a use case that we have with Golden State Foods that incorporates IoT, analytics, blockchain. I think that's also a sign of an advanced solution, is one that combines various forms of emerging tech and just brings visibility from upstream all the way to the consumption level. And it just provides that information in real time and brings together customers, competitors. There's just true collaboration in the industry.
Now, do you ever see this scenario that you just described evolving into one where the participants barter and exchange value with a token? Paige.
I do. I haven't seen it yet, but I think that it's coming. And I feel like back to kind of the concept of essentially a hybrid blockchain, or rather than choosing between a permissioned or a public blockchain, there would be aspects that, or there would be blockchains that have aspects of both rather. So with a project like Hedera Hashgraph, and we're even working with them on a Hedera consensus service, we're enabling customers to have the best of both types of blockchains so that they have permissioned aspects of their blockchain, but then also permissionless or public aspects that is available to the end consumer. So I think that's the model that we would see first rather than going to a fully permissionless model. But there's also Hyperledger projects like Besu or Burrow that are working toward the interoperability play. So for that tokenization amongst consumers and kind of this marketplace that you're speaking of, I think that the hybrid blockchain vision will need to come to fruition first in order for that to be possible.
Okay. All right. So a question for Todd. What role, everything's in the cloud now, but also too, everyone is also online, and you can tell our speed is slowing down, things are starting to break up. Some folks are gonna want things on-prem. And can you speak to the role that cloud will play versus on-prem for blockchain as it evolves?
Sure, I think that's a great question. I think there's a number of aspects there. Some of them have to do with regulatory requirements, such as things like locality of data and whether data can cross borders or not. So you have data residency issues that require data to be in a particular country or region. And there's nobody who has cloud presence in every country. So those are going to be cases where people have to run their blockchain networks on their on-premise if they have data that has to be maintained within their country. There are other issues, though, in terms of things around security and stuff like that. We don't have really good, secure, trusted execution environments. And so as a result, when you run blockchain networks in on-premise environments, it's likely that the on-premise equipment could be tampered with, could be monitored, could be examined. Data could be extracted from those private on-premise environments that maybe you want to have some privacy around. So there are solutions for that, but by putting your blockchain network in the cloud, you now have a disinterested party basically running your nodes. And so the likelihood that somebody in that environment is going to snoop your data or steal the data or do something else, largely it's around privacy, altering it, obviously blockchain already handles. But in those kinds of environments, running your blockchain network in a cloud environment with a disinterested third-party cloud provider gives you probably much better privacy considerations, at least from the other participants within the network. So I think those are a couple areas that are going to be consideration. I think we're going to see a lot of movement towards the cloud. We've already done that for other areas. We're going to see more of that. Companies don't want to manage their own data centers if they don't have to, or reduce the size of those data centers. But we're going to have a mixed environment for probably for the foreseeable future, since, as I say, data residency is going to make it impossible for many applications to use the cloud.
Wow. Yes. So, okay, that sounds like some real good points. That I've been thinking about things like someone cooks the books. That's kind of old-fashioned, but the bookkeeper, they put things in, then they go back and they change the books, and something like blockchain can expose that. But if it's on, if they've got full control of it, then that kind of defeats the purpose. So,
yeah, I think the issue there is that the modification of it, I'm not as concerned about, because you've got multiple copies of this, and so the other members would be able to see that this has been modified. It's really the issue of the confidentiality or privacy of the information. Can somebody access this who shouldn't have access to it? So if you have, let's say, 10 participants in a blockchain network, and some of them have their compute nodes in their own data centers, with enough determination, they would be able to essentially extract any data from that blockchain that they want. Right? So, because at some point in general, unless you use things like homomorphic encryption or things like that, the data is going to be that you're trying to protect is going to be in plain text inside those computing elements on the customer's data center. And once that happens, right now, in general, for most environments, there are ways to be able to extract that. So customers have to be aware of that, that really highly sensitive information, they need to be concerned about where that data sits and who might be able to access it through other means than the blockchain itself.
Okay, yes, and those are a lot of things that you've told me when we were working on the blockchain as a service book, and you were kind enough to help me with that. And really good points, because a lot of those things get really confused. People think, well, it's blockchain, therefore you can't modify it. But I keep telling you, you can modify it, but you can get caught when you do it. So I think that you think that's a decent statement, Todd?
Yeah, absolutely. When people use the term that a blockchain is immutable, it drives me nuts, because there are very few things in the world that are immutable. With enough determination, you can probably change almost anything. So I like to use the term tamper evident, which I think gets to your point that you can change things, but you're going to be found out.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. And okay, so let's shift over to IBM. What is next for IBM, Paige? I know everything has just been made topsy-turvy right now, but what do you see as the next big push for IBM Blockchain?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this kind of in context of IBM Blockchain Platform, just because that's where I play and that's where I think I have the most insight into, because IBM Blockchain is such a big organization. But around the IBM Blockchain Platform, this kind of plays off of what you guys were just discussing around cloud versus on-prem and letting customers deploy from where they are, or rather where they need to be. So with IBM Blockchain Platform, there's the ability to have members of a network and let them deploy on the environment of their choice, leveraging Red Hat OpenShift. So that capability is something that we're really building out, and it's already available, but I think it's going to enable the existing networks to scale, and we're really working on bringing the true value of the network effect to all of the members and enable them to onboard additional members by not having the environment be a barrier. I think that our work around Hedera Consensus Service that I mentioned earlier is really important, because it has the potential to provide the core innovation of proof-of-work blockchains, Bitcoin, Ethereum, without the performance and privacy trade-offs. So it also makes it possible for those Hyperledger projects to use the service to put the transactions in order, but then it eliminates the need for them to stand up nodes for the ordering, and they get the trust model of a public network. So those two things are really important. And as far as features specifically, next week we have the latest version of our platform being released. So it leverages Hyperledger Fabric 1.4.6 and distributed raft, Java smart contract support, and the enhancement of multi-cloud with support on Linux One and IBM Z. So that's just enhancing the security of those that want to run on-prem. And I could probably go on all day about it, so I'll stop there. But those are just some of the action items and next steps that we're working toward.
Well, that's fantastic. Is there a place where they can go, where people can go to keep up with this? Is there a IBM Blockchain platform page people can watch, or a blog?
Yes. So it's in our release notes that are within our cloud documentation. And maybe when we post this recording, I can link it there. But they'll be able to keep track of all these updates there.
Fantastic. Okay, and I'm really excited that things are moving forward like this. And Todd, I'd like to ask you kind of a two-part question. What is Oracle working on as far as a blockchain solution? What's really got momentum in your eyes? And then also, where are things heading?
Let's see. As far as momentum goes, we're still seeing, at least as far as use cases, supply chain still is probably the largest use case. So we're seeing a lot there. There's a lot of interest around identity as well. We're seeing interest in a number of different areas. I think the things that we're focusing on in terms of where we want to take our platform is to address some of those problems that I mentioned earlier. So things are around governance, things around operating and administering your network. Governance in particular, because forming a consortium, which is a lot of these networks are consortium-based networks, that's a challenge. We don't have huge amounts of experience in doing that, so creating tooling to be able to help customers create consortium, to be able to govern those consortiums and govern their blockchain networks is something that we're focusing on. So we are focusing, as I say, on those problems that I mentioned earlier. That's I think, sort of our biggest area. But the other area that we're focusing on as well is that Oracle has a large number of SaaS applications. And so we are in the process of integrating blockchain technology into those SaaS applications. So some of those have already been announced, such as our intelligent track and trace. But we are developing or integrating our blockchain platform into these SaaS applications, such that these now become capabilities of those SaaS applications, and the customers don't have to worry about, spinning up a blockchain network. How do they do the integration? Because the integration is a fair amount of work. So those are the sort of things that we're focusing on.
That's really cool. Boy, that's a lot. And so let's see. Now, I didn't ask you guys, I didn't mention this question ahead of time. So if you're not comfortable to speak to it, that's fine. But I thought of it. I posted an article on LinkedIn about a week ago that said IBM Blockchain and Oracle Blockchain groups were going to be working together on some things. And I think it involved maybe trade lands. Does anybody know about that?
I don't.
Okay, I don't either. That article was actually the first I saw of it as well, and I mean I was excited to see it, and hopefully Todd, you and I will have a chance to work together on a project or two. But I think just the similarities around Hyperledger Fabric and having a software and a SaaS offering and integrating that into products, those things all really align. So I would assume it's something around that effort.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of fascinating. So, yeah, I won't quote you on that, and I was just curious. But so, okay, so I guess let me get back in the mode. Paige, is there anything you'd like to conclude with?
I just want to thank you again for bringing us together. Thank everyone for listening. I think it's important to get started on your blockchain journey regardless of what type of business you are, and start with awareness and education and then move toward experimentation. Leverage the existing developer tools that are out there, like the VS Code extension for IBM Blockchain Platform, and just really feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to assist you on that journey. But grateful for fellow blockchainers like yourselves on this call and those listening. And I hope we can use this time in quarantine to increase our focus and stay heads down on what we're passionate about.
Thank you. Todd?
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this, by the way, Karen. I really appreciate it. I think we need to do a lot more education at all levels, from C-level down to the developer. But I think we also have a tremendous amount of learning that's still going to take place. This is still very, very new technology. The design patterns that we've used over the decades that we know really well don't necessarily apply to blockchain, at least in the same way. And so we're going to learn new design patterns. We're going to learn new ways of building applications, new ways of companies to work together. And all those are going to mean that this technology is going to change rather dramatically, I think, over the next decade or so. You look at, how long we had relational databases, 40 years? And they're still making a lot of enhancements to relational databases. The same thing's going to happen with blockchain. And in the early days of relational databases, things changed a lot, and that's going to happen with blockchain as well. We're going to see enormous change, and people are going to have to be able to adopt. They're going to have to be able to figure out, as these new capabilities come into these blockchain networks, how do they use that in their existing blockchain applications that they may have already built. So I think it's going to be an exciting time here, and I think we're hopefully past the whole hype curve stuff. We're seeing real applications in real production environments, and I think that's proof that this technology is here and is going to stay.
That's super positive and super encouraging, and I'd just like to add one thought to that, and that is the other piece of the puzzle is the legislation. And it's important that everyone's legislatures also get in the education cycle. Educate, educate, educate. And this includes the lawmakers that are making the decisions, because the last thing we want to be done is the states to pass laws they don't understand. And so in Texas, what we're doing is we formed the Texas Blockchain Committee, and with a fellow named Lee Bratcher, I'm a co-founder. And you can check it out at texasblockchaincommittee.com. And we're pushing to have an official blockchain work group formed for the state of Texas to really understand and prioritize what Texas needs as far as blockchain legislation. So I would like to also wrap up by thanking each one of my guests. You don't know how much it means to me that you were able to do this, considering the circumstances. Here we are, we would just be getting dressed now for our session and heading to the green room. And we've got here we are, it's a wrap. So you're just extraordinary people. some of the most brilliant people I've ever met, and I really, really appreciate you giving your thoughts on this really critical topic.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, that's a wrap.